exactly is causing the affordability crisis with housing in America? You hear politicians talk about this all the time because, of course, it's an election cycle and politicians do love hot topics, but they seldom like to talk about the underlying causes or the solutions that are possible. But I'm a little hot under the collar right now simply because my profession, the realtors, real estate agents, licensees, developers, builders, anybody involved in the housing space, we sure do get blamed for this. But let me just tell you, the realtors did not cause the affordability challenges that are going on in the country. So first of all, let's just address what I keep seeing in my comments from those of you who keep trolling me. And I know you're watching, hey, what's up? And I know you're going to comment again. And you should know this, my profession is not worthless. I am sick and tired of hearing people say that realtors are leeches or are causing the housing affordability crisis. We're not. As a professional, I charge a professional fee. And you know what? The consumers that choose to hire me, they know how much I cost and they sign on the little dotted line. And in fact, there are some who don't choose me because I'm too expensive and they can go right on down the street because this is a wildly competitive business. And just in my market, I can find any kind of compensation plan out there. And as a consumer, I could choose any kind of plan I want to choose. Why do people choose me? Because I've been in forever. I have great experience, great knowledge, and I'm really great at personalizing solutions. And that is valuable to a lot of people. But the fee they pay me is not what's caused the market to go wildly haywire. You want to know what's caused the market prices to go haywire? It is supply and demand. And when we talk about supply and demand, you should know this. If you watch the government's suggestions on solutions, they like to think that you can solve a supply and demand problem with more demand. Slow down for a minute there and realize y'all are electing the wrong people. I am so intrigued by the fact that we keep electing people to make housing decisions that do not have experience in the housing markets or apparently don't have the willingness to talk to experts in the housing market about what's actually going on. If you go back to Basic Economics 101, and I mean the class you might take in high school because you're required to, or the class that you took in college because you had to check a box, we talk about supply and demand. When you don't have enough supply and demand stays level, prices go up. We actually saw the opposite of this during the Great Recession for those of y'all with a memory bank. And at that time, we had way too much supply and falling demand, which meant we had falling prices. So let's talk about why we have a lack of supply. First of all, the federal government doesn't control supply, no matter how much they like to act like they do. The supply issues come from the lowest level of government. And I don't mean low as in a small area. I mean as in the closest to you on this totem pole of where you have access. That is your county commissioner candidates, your city council candidates, and your planning and zoning committees. So if you want to know where your housing supply is, you need to go look at who you're electing to these local offices and ask really specific and pointed questions about real estate and development and housing. And frankly, what you should be looking for, if you've got a modicum of common sense, is the people who are able to address this from a smart growth perspective. They don't say yes to everything. They don't say no to everything, but they do understand that their decisions have long-ranging consequences. And I mean long-ranging because the reason we're in a crisis right now is that we have not been building enough for approximately 10 years. And when I say building enough, some of y'all are already getting geared up to say, we don't need any more houses, Leigh Brown. Nobody wants to look like Atlanta or Charlotte, and I feel you on that. But you can't say no to everything, because when you say no to everything, that means that what you have goes straight up in price. And you know what that means? You're not just keeping out the neighbors that you've never met. You're also keeping your kids and grandkids from buying housing, which is why so many of these think tank articles like to talk about how the young people are giving up on home ownership. Well, you know what? Some young people want to live near their parents and grandparents. They want to have those babysitters available, but if they can't live near you, then they're either going to have to live with you, which is not a long-term answer, or they're going to rent, and then they find out that rents have gone up, and we'll come back to that, or they move elsewhere to find somewhere that is affordable. So you have to think about housing supply as an ongoing solution that you have to find. how do we say yes to things on a regular basis? And then how do we say yes to a diversity of products? Because when we talk about what kind of housing belongs in an area, you want to make sure that you have trailer houses. Because whether you want to admit it or not, mobile homes are the original affordable housing. And they're fairly nice, y'all. Don't be turning your nose up at them until you've gone to look at what comes out of these factories. Because a little known fact about mobile homes, they're built in a factory under roof and in controlled conditions. So sometimes they're in better built shape than a stick-built house that's been built under the elements out on a lot. And then we have to ask ourselves, all right, if we want to have these in our community, how does our zoning say yes or no to that? Because in many communities around the U.S., it's a flat no to mobile homes because there's this phrase that runs around on the internet called trailer trash. And that's probably the one thing I can say that doesn't get me banned from any of the social networks because they love it when you talk smack about trailers for some reason. But for anybody who's ever lived in one, you lived in a house, and there's nothing wrong with the type of house that you chose. Now, your market may also want to have condos because you have people who want a maintenance-free lifestyle, or they want the ability to have a little bit of privacy where they can come home and carry on and nobody knows that they're there or not. You might have a need for single-family homes in your community because regardless of what you might hear from states like California, which have put a moratorium on single-family zoning, there's a whole lot of reasons people want their own house, and it's not just so they can have an 8,000 square foot McMansion. A lot of folks are very happy with a 1,600 square foot, 3-bedroom, 2-bath. They just want to have a little bit of privacy in the form of their own 4 walls, and they want to have a little front yard, a little backyard, a little place to plant some azaleas and tomatoes that belongs to them. And then of course some single family homes do look like the 8,000 square foot McMansion home that's on the golf course because that's what they've dreamed of. And by grannies, if they've worked hard enough and want to have it, why shouldn't we build it? That's always been the American way. It's not that you can be told what you have and what you can have. It's that you can see what you want and go get it. And that's why housing has always worked really well in this country, because private property rights means that you get to pick what that private property looks like, put a plan together and go get it. That's been interrupted right now by local officials who think they know better than you what you should have or can have. And in fact, the feds do get involved in this because there's a lot of rumbling in certain letter agencies in Washington, D.C. And hey, friends, I know y'all are watching this because I know where my spies are too. And those letter agencies want to say what houses belong where. That is not for them to decide. That is for the consumer to decide. That is for the demand side to say, I would like to live here and let's see what options I may have. So now let's go back to that supply and demand situation again, because I did point out that the letter agencies are watching my video, and I know that they are. I don't really think the public understands how much the letter agencies are interfering in real estate right now. So if you want to know why things are not affordable, ask yourself why the feds keep throwing up roadblocks and why the DOJ is so interested in real estate. And then ask yourself why the VA and the FHA and the USDA have not proactively made their rules more flexible so that more folks have access to home ownership, because we should be making sure as a country that our elected officials are creating more opportunities for every American. That is their job. It is not to restrict opportunities. In fact, if we see somebody who does not come from a history of home ownership, that's the first person I want to talk to and say, hey friend, let's figure out what your pathway looks like wherever you want to be with the job that you have or that you're dreaming of having. Let's clean up that credit score and keep going. And by the way, why do the credit bureaus have so much power over all of us? They're not elected either. And frankly, in the words of the immortal late great Tim Wilson, he did say that the people that run the credit bureaus are probably the same ones that took names in the 3rd grade. And well, that would have been me because I took names from my teachers. But still, we have too much power in some really tiny agencies where you as a consumer really don't have enough say in things. And that can determine the cost of housing, because if it costs you a ton to get into that house, there's a cost of waiting too. And anybody out there watching this who wanted to buy a house in 2019 or 20 or 21 and couldn't get the pieces in place, and by the time you were ready, interest rates had taken off, and you feel like you've been priced out of the market, ask yourself who all was involved in that, because spoiler alert, it was not the realtors. So let's also look at what is happening in Washington, D.C. that's driving up the cost of housing. Any of these articles that you read, y'all, because I read all of them. I'm a nerd, I admit it, and so I read on your behalf. You're welcome. I have not yet seen that the inflationary processes that are happening at the Fed are at the root cause of why things are more expensive. Because one thing that a lot of folks just don't get is that every time the Fed prints more dollars, that puts more supply of dollars into the marketplace, which drives down the value of those very dollars. And so that's what happens with inflation. We have too many dollars chasing too few goods, which drives the cost up. So really, in addition to the fact that more people want to buy houses and more people have been held back for the last couple of years because of all the reasons, now you have to ask yourself how much inflation and the Fed's policies have driven up the cost of housing. And so if we want the cost of housing to come down, we have to do what's called QT, quantitative tightening, bring some of those dollars back in and reduce the supply of dollars so that the dollars will behave differently. You can watch all of the modern monetary theory classes that you want to watch. They are not real. That is not how you fix any of this. You don't hand people money and think you're going to fix a problem in an inflationary environment. And frankly, you're seeing a lot of proposals right now that want to add more dollars to the demand side. Y'all, that's just going to keep driving the cost up and out of reach of an entire group of homeowners and homeowners to be. So you need to be talking to your local officials and your state officials and your federal elected officials about all of these items, because I don't know that they think you're smart enough to understand it, because frankly, I think some of them need better staff and hiring decisions as well, which means I think all of our elected officials should be talking to somebody educated on the local real estate market, and that's probably you, the local realtor who's watching this, and you shouldn't wait for somebody else to educate. You need to get right in there and say, listen up here, friend, here's what's happening in our market. And so when we think about what's happening in our markets, let's go ahead and talk about the escalating cost of rent, because when we talk housing getting unaffordable, that includes rents, because some folks have either chosen not to buy, they're not ready to buy, or they don't have that space in their life right now, and so they are renters. And as a small mom and pop landlord, I love my tenants. I want to take great care of them, and I want to make sure that I'm keeping it as affordable as possible. But what y'all should know is that when landlords raise the rent, it's not just because we want to be Scrooge McDuck in a bathtub full of dollar bills. We have increased costs too, because property taxes keep going up. Insurance is crazy, and a lot of our investors out there right now can't afford insurance on the property. So if you're watching this and you're a tenant, you better make sure you've got renter's insurance, because it's a mess out there on the insurance side. And by the way, if you're renting something, ask your property manager if the landlord and the underlying investor have appropriate insurance. That's my advice to you today. So you should also know that what else goes up in addition to property taxes and insurance? If I've got to do maintenance on my building, and frankly, this has been the year of maintenance for me, whether it is the tree that fell on the corner of a building, or the heating and air going out, or the water heater that died, those all cost money to fix. And so when I have to spend a lot of money on maintenance, what's going up? The cost of the repair and the cost of the labor. And of course, I have a time cost involved too, because I do not want my tenants to be uncomfortable for any extended period of time. And that's actually how most mom and pop investors operate. But when you hear your government officials start talking about things like rent caps and rental flat rates, or what we like to call, let's just call it rent control. When you hear those phrases, especially when you hear the first two, where they're trying not to say rent control, it's because rent control is actually not constitutional here in North Carolina, because our leadership took action years and years ago to make sure that we would be a healthy environment. But you're hearing it talked about in a lot of states. Now, here's what that means. When we talk about rent caps or rent control, it sounds good to a tenant. Your cost can't go up any more than you would like. Okay, great. The underlying investor, though, those numbers may not match the investor's numbers. You know what that means? That means that that property owner may sell. You know what happens if that property owner sells? Well, let's just say it's in a neighborhood undergoing changes, and we can call them regentrification. You can call it gentrification. You can just call it market changes. But you may have a property owner who's got a quadplex that they got from their grandma because she bought it years and years ago to have a little rental income. Well, it might be time for him to say, you know what, forget it. If I can't make any money on my rents here to keep up with the cost, I'll just sell it. Well, then you've lost 4 affordable units. You know what comes in usually? those super expensive and new construction things that are either rentals owned by hedge funds that are way out of area, or it just gets sold and demolished and the rentals go away altogether and you have more expensive units, thereby reducing the supply of affordable units while the demand is still high. So what's that do to the cost? You with me, students? It keeps going up. So anytime you read these articles and you start getting frustrated about the cost of housing, I feel you. You should be frustrated. But make sure that you're talking to your elected officials. Tell them stop spending. Stop printing money. Say yes to more housing opportunities. Say yes to a diversity of housing options. And support your mom and pop landlords, because that's the only affordable rentals left. And we want to make sure that when we support housing, we provide opportunities across the spectrum on the ownership side and on the tenant side, and that we start cutting back on the regulatory red tape that's killing us. And by the way, DOJ, because I know y'all are watching this, stay out of real estate because you're not getting educated fully. You're only hearing one side of the story. And anytime you want to talk to me after my videos, you let me know, because I'll tell you exactly what it's like as a practitioner on the ground who knows a lot more than you give me credit for. Because contrary to popular opinion, realtors aren't stupid. We are very smart. We are very in tune with our communities, and we love working our tails off to make this country better.